it came out of a feeling and a need within our particular committee that we wanted to go out and actually talk to people and find out what they wanted from the group and what the issues were and how we could help in terms of training and development. And things have certainly changed over the last few years. Pat Gowden's here tonight, and Pat was chair when I first got involved with this group, which is over 10 years ago. And actually, now I'm working in a university and actually listening to the focus groups and interviews. I was, I'm surprised at the changes that have been going on. It's been radical, and that was really the reason that we've done this project. And we've a range of speakers this evening, and all of them have been engaged in the conversations, in research and development around local public services. So I'm delighted that we're joined by Sarah Pinch, our president, this evening. And we've also got David Holdstock, Director of Communications at the Local Government Association. Adrian Roxon, who works at Sheffield Hallam University, and flukily, as we were launching this project, he was in touch with Carmel, who he works with, and they were beginning a 3-year research project looking at local government public relations, so it was perfect. So I said, come and join us, and we'll work together and get out and talk to people and find out, what's going on, what's needed within the sector. And I'm delighted also that Bridget Aherne has joined us this evening. Bridget is Head of Communication at Nottinghamshire Fire and also Chair of FirePRO. And one of the things that we worked really hard to do with this project was not just talk to practitioners and also organisational leaders. We wanted to try and connect with other representative bodies, and we've done that. So from Bridget, it was FirePRO. We had Amanda Coleman, who chairs the police communicators. We interviewed members of the executive at LG Communications, and also Mark Rogers, who's the president of Solace, the chief executive association. So it's been a wide-ranging project and really interesting to find out what's been going on. Anyway, I think that's probably enough of me, so I'll hand over to Sarah. Thank you.
Hopefully that's all right, Tim, is it? Thank you, Wendy. My name's Sarah Pinch. I have the enormous honour and huge responsibility of being the president of the Institute for 2015. I worked at the BBC for most of the beginning of my career until 2000, and since then have worked in big corporate communications jobs. And to quote our great friend and colleague Anne Gregory, I chose the easy topics, so public transport, international development and the NHS. But what I'm here to talk about tonight is this piece of work and the enormous amount of work that has gone into it. And when you come to read it, I think you will realise that it is a very well researched and wide piece of work. The CIPR is made what it is predominantly by its volunteers. We have a small and dedicated group of staff who work here, led by Alistair McCapra, but it is through our members and because of our members that we can operate groups like the Public Services Group. Wendy and I met to talk about this a few months ago. I bought her lunch, and I'm sure what's been going round in her head over the last few months is there is no such thing as a free lunch. But what struck me throughout the conversation that we had together was her personal determination to complete this piece of work on behalf of the group. And Wendy, I'd really, right now, like to thank you for that. Wendy took what to all of us who are PR professionals is exactly the right approach. So on behalf of the local public services group, she wanted to find out what the membership wanted. She wanted to find out how the group could most support them in the most meaningful way, in the way that would contribute back into their own organisations. And she came with the support of academic colleagues, not just Sheffield, Hallam, but also her own colleagues at Manchester Metropolitan University. CIPR members, indeed all communications and PR people who work within this arena, are an easy target. Always an easy target for cuts within their own organisations, for FOIs from journalists and MPs, for cheap jibes about wasting money, spin and polish. In my mind, the work that members of this group do, and other colleagues who are not yet in membership know the use of the word yet, is about talking to communities about vital access to vital services, whether those are services provided by local councils or services provided by the health or social care communities, or indeed by the fire service and the police. These are all in their own way life-saving and life-enhancing services. The work that these professionals do is about engaging communities in an extremely more fragmented media landscape and indeed community landscape. As far as I can see, there is nothing further away from spin and polish. And this year I've been really pleased as president to be able to defend very clearly and absolutely the work of our members and our communications colleagues in these areas. I'll say it because Bridget won't. I'm also delighted that Bridget is here not only in her role as the coordinator within the fire service, but also wearing the badge of honour, although there isn't one, but I think maybe there should be one, as this year's winner of the IOD and CIPR Director of the Year for Communications. So people who work in this industry are influencing and communicating at the highest levels within these organisations. They're delivering clarity around the vital services that they deliver and around the access to those services. As the Institute, I give you my word that we will do everything we can to defend the spending on your work, champion the excellence in your work, and encourage the diversity in your work. And this research piece is amazing. And I know that it's always a risk to build things up before people have read it. But so I read it again on the train, just making sure that when I read it twice before, I hadn't been hoodwinked by something. And it really is fantastic. And I would love to be able to stand here, or Rob Brown, to be able to stand here next year as the incoming president in front of every single group within the CIPR who have done such a thorough piece of research within their members. So I guess that's me throwing down a gauntlet to our other groups. But Wendy and the committee, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for doing this piece of work, and I commend it to you. I'm holding your microphone, David. Thank you very much.
Blimey, I think I feel a bit of a fraud actually amongst such an esteemed panel. So why am I here? Well, I guess sort of 20 years being one of those targets kind of has put me in the eye of the storm over that period, but certainly we are at the moment. And I'd like to start by just saying thank you to Wendy for inviting me to speak, and say congratulations on a fantastic piece of work. Lots of us have done, including us at the LJ, bits of work where we're looking at the numbers and the kind of quantitative stuff. But this really digs down into sort of some of the issues that we're all facing in public sector communications. I know you spent a lot of time doing a lot of detailed kind of work and interviews with people. I suspect, like myself, many saw that as a bit of a therapy session, actually, and it was a chance to kind of, just kind of get off your chest all the things that have been kind of worrying you over the last few months and years. So, so congratulations on a really great piece of work. I think what it does is, as well as giving us a kind of snapshot of where public sector communications is at the moment, it also starts to set out a bit of a roadmap for us around the sorts of things that we need to be thinking about, and to be honest, things that we need to control our own destiny over, rather than things being done to us going forwards, which I think is a real danger for us. I mean, one of the things I've been saying for a number of years, 5 or 6 years, I was saying to colleagues earlier on, is that, you know, we are going to be at a point where we're going to be looking at public sector communication hubs based in localities. And my kind of amazement is that we're not there yet. I think some of this work kind of flags some of that and starts to kind of signpost some of that for the future. I worked in a London borough a couple of years ago, and we got literally to the sort of 11th hour and 59th minute of me looking after a local public sector communications hub. And at that kind of final moment, the local kind of cops at the senior level and health and everybody else had agreed it was the way forward. And when it got to the national, there was a real nervousness about kind of territories and protecting kind of empires. And I think that we're in a space now where all of that is gone. It's no longer relevant, and I don't think that we're going to be in that space. And if you think about one of the big issues for us now in local public sector communications, and that's devolution, that is about groups of councils, public sector organisations grouping together for the greater good. And we ran an event in Birmingham yesterday where sort of 80 to 100 public sector communicators did the kind of help. We haven't done this before. This is new for us. We need to think about what that new world is going to look like. And I think that this piece of work kind of flags some of that stuff. So from where I sit at the LJ, kind of how do things look from my perspective? Well, at the moment everything is focused on the 25th of November, the spending review. You probably know that all of the government departments have been asked to model what a 25% reduction in funding would look like, and a 40%. So in local government, we're modelling a 40% reduction in funding, because we think that's, you know, kind of where we may be. And that is going to be incredibly difficult, not just for us in terms of our resources as communicators. You know, will we have less money to do the stuff we're doing? Will we have less people? You know, less resources generally? But it's going to require a completely different conversation with our residents. You know, we're going to be saying to them, if you want to protect the services that you value, the things that are important to you, and actually this doesn't just apply to local government, it's fire, police, health. If you want to protect those services that you value, frankly, you're going to have to do more for yourselves. Those of you that are able, you're going to need to do more of those things for yourself. And that's a really difficult conversation when, you know, local public services are kind of seen as the kind of safety net for many people. And I've kind of described it, you know, it's my own description, so no one else can get the blame for this, as us needing to move to almost something that I describe as the IKEA model. You know, reasonable quality furniture at a reasonable price, but you've got to go and collect it yourself and you've got to build it yourself. And I think public services are kind of moving to that place where, you know, it may be that people have got to do a bit more of that stuff for themselves, so they continue to get the things that they really value. So that's coming around the corner. We did a national story this week. Some of you will have seen it. That the work we're doing, we estimate that between 12 and 14 councils, if the modelling is 40%, are at that tipping point. That's how serious it is, where, you know, it could well be that there are that number of councils that are in a place where, you know, councils can't go bankrupt by law, but they may not be able to deliver services. You know, is there a difference there? So difficult. I mentioned about devolution and the sort of this notion of combined authorities. For me, that goes beyond councils. You know, that's about all local public services working together, and, you know, some of the challenges that brings. But I think as communicators, you know, we are fleet of foot, we're nimble, we're able to adapt to those things. And I think that we're able to kind of control our own destiny around some of that stuff. But there are some things that the research throws up that I think we need to listen to and kind of take notice of before some of that stuff does kind of get taken out of our hands. In terms of sort of specifics, but they are also big issues for us, in local government, but it impacts on others. Housing is massive. The housing bill going through Parliament at the moment is huge, and as communicators, that's a big issue for us in local areas. And the other issue is around refugees. You know, 6 weeks ago, there was a kind of mass outpouring of kind of public support and help. You know, I'll offer you a spare room, and you know, and so on and so on. But the challenges that we're all going to face in our local areas when those very vulnerable people come to different parts of the country, and existing communities start to ask questions about their place in those communities. And as communicators, whether it's councils, whether it's, you know, the other public services, that's going to be a real challenge for us to kind of deal with some of that stuff. I think for me, all of that is kind of wrapped up in the kind of resilience word, in the as public services, but as us as public service communicators, there's going to be a need for us to be really resilient in terms of dealing with some of those really, really tough issues. This is no more about us producing a nice glossy leaflet and sending it out. You know, we are way beyond that. This is about dealing with real issues, really difficult issues as we go forward. I think digital is the other issue that kind of I know does come out, and you'll talk about that in a bit more detail, Wendy. In that, you know, there's again some challenges for us around. Traditionally, we are kind of professionally precious, and often rightly so. We do this; it's what we do because we're the professional communicators. But there is going to be an element of us having to give some of that up, and that's the right thing to do. But what do we give up? How do we give it up, and to whom? So some real questions that I think that we'll need to answer around that. So I think for me, just to kind of summarise, you know, we're moving into a kind of arena where we're going to be sharing people, hopefully good practice, and I think there's a real role for all the organisations that have been part of this to kind of play their part in making sure that where there is good practice, that we share that amongst ourselves and amongst colleagues, so we're really learning from the best, you know, not kind of sitting in our office week in, week out and kind of doing the same old. You know, one of the things I often say when people say, you know, what advice would you give me around kind of my own development? And it's quite simple: get out more, go and talk to people, meet more people, understand what others are doing, because you'll find out some things that maybe you're doing really well, so it'll kind of validate that, but also you'll find out some new things. I'm learning all the time. I'm learning from tonight. So I think there's a place for all of us to do some of that. I think there's a role for us to be at the heart of this kind of massive change. You know, it's not just about how we structure our teams and about how we deliver things and working with partners. It's about our staff. It's about our residents. You know, let's move away from kind of hiring change management consultants who are working on re-engineering the back office. That's about change, behaviour change programs, and who are the best people to deliver change management programs and those behaviour change programs. It's us, communicators, and we should be leading that and grasping that and not letting kind of these other people come in and take some of that agenda. I think we need to make our own case more. Again, I know evaluation has come up in this piece of work. You know, are we selling ourselves enough? Are we validating what we're doing so we can say, look, this is the difference we've made. Here's the evidence. You can't argue with the evidence. That's it from me. I just want to say well done on a fantastic piece of work. Really sort of proud to kind of be a little tiny part of that. I know others have been involved as well, so a kind of real public sector piece of work that I think will really add to the kind of debate and hopefully move some of the agenda forward, particularly around the sort of training and development stuff. So fantastic work, congratulations.
Right, I'm going to join the Wendy Moran fan club, I'm afraid, and become the honorary secretary. I think Sarah's obviously the president, so I'm the honorary secretary. But I'd just like to say thank you very much to Wendy, because it's an accident I'm here, in the sense that Wendy was obviously pursuing the agenda with you as a group, And we stumbled across each other. I'm trying to remember, I think it was Carmel, my colleague, who couldn't be here tonight, who actually made contact with you, or you made contact with her. And out of a conversation came the realisation that we at Sheffield Hallam University were doing a piece of research that was very similar, in very similar territory to you as a group. And so I'm delighted to be here tonight to be able to share initial findings. I say they're initial findings because we haven't quite finished the piece of research we're doing, but it's close enough that I felt comfortable and with Wendy's encouragement to share with you what we found. And actually what was really interesting as well for me, and I should say that I'm one of you in some respects because I'm what's known in the trade as a practitioner academic. That's a way of saying that I'm not quite a real academic. In other words, I used to work in PR before I went into teaching PR and researching in PR. And I actually started, my first job was actually in local government PR back in the 1980s, which dates me, I know. And what's interesting for me, listening to what David was saying and some of the things that have been said generally, I've heard around the room tonight, is that I can recall rate capping and the early years of Margaret Thatcher's regime and local government going through very similar issues then. And for those of you who share my grey hair, you might remember some of those days as well. So it's quite interesting for me to come back to local government after a gap and look at it with fresh eyes and realise that some of the issues haven't changed, but some of the issues are the same. The other thing to say about it before I go into revealing some of the, or building some of the findings that some of which you may know about already, is to say that actually this is an area that hasn't really been researched. That local government, with the honourable exception of the LGA, as David mentioned, and you as a group, there's not a lot of research available about what's going on in local government, which I think is a tragedy because personally I've always been, since my first job actually as a journalist reporting local government and then working in local government PR, I've always felt that local government is a crucial part of our society and therefore I feel very strongly and passionately that we need to throw more of a light onto local government. The piece of research I'm involved in with my colleague, which phase one very much matches what you've been doing as a group, is over 3 phases, as you might guess from the fact I've said phase one. Phase one is very much to look at the period from 2010 to 2015, look at the period of austerity or austerity programme from central government and examine what that's meant for local government communications. Well, actually public service communication, but in reality a lot of our research is centred around local government because it's been the area that we've found most opportunity to talk to people. Just to fill you in, quick advert for the rest of the research, the second phase, which will start in the new year, is going to then look at what's happened to the local media in that period. So 2010 to 2015, what have been the trends in local media? Because the third phase is that we're interested in examining what has happened to accountability in local democracy. What role does local government communications play and the local media play in that very important part of society called democracy and how accountable are local councils and local services. Right, I'll go on to the research. I've got the opening bits out of the way. The research is qualitative largely. We did start with a survey, and if anybody in the room filled in the survey, thank you very much, but it's been predominantly qualitative interviews, and I can recognise a few faces in the room who I sat across a table for an hour with a tape recorder in front of them and grilled them about what their thoughts were. But it's qualitative. We've been looking at what are people's perceptions in communications in the public sector, but particularly local government. And we've looked at a variety of councils. We've looked at counties, districts, cities, boroughs. We've tried to make sure that we've got a good mix. The reason the research isn't finished is because we just want to make sure we've got a robust sample. And that goes also for geographically. We've tried to make sure it's a sample across the country. What we found is, I'm afraid, not an easy story to sell. And I'm going to try and do it because I used to work in PR, so I'm meant to be able to do this, but I'll try so you can tell me at the end whether I've managed it or not. We found a variety of circumstances. And the variety of circumstances, you won't be surprised to hear me say, is about things like, well, where was communications at the start of this period in 2010? What status and what role did communications have within the local authority we were talking to? Because in some councils, clearly, communications was at the top table, reporting directly to the chief exec, on the management board, whatever. But in some councils, it's lower down the structure, and that is an important factor that we've had to take account of. The second one, and David's just referred to it, and I was listening to fascinating interviews with the chair of the LGA, who's a Conservative, by the way, who then used what was meant to be, as I understand it, an interview about what local government could expect from the 25th of November statement to talk about councils being in trouble. And that was fascinating for me because in our research, again, the financial health of the authorities we were talking to was again another key factor. So how robust were the finances of the council we were talking to had an effect on communications. In other words, if a council was reasonably financially well off, communications was something they felt they could afford. In some councils where finances were tight, perhaps some of the councils David's referring to, I don't know, clearly communications, unfortunately, was seen as perhaps not an essential core activity or was seen as less important. The other factor that affected the picture is very much the question of the historical or the history of how communications are developed in the local authorities we're talking to. So again, if there was a long history of commitment to communications and a realisation that communication is important, we saw a different picture from those where perhaps that commitment wasn't so strong. Okay, what were the findings? Or the initial findings we've got, as I say, these are yet to be absolutely completed, so what I'm giving you tonight is, if you like, a preview. Firstly, I'm afraid to say significant job losses. It's a shame at a time when the PR industry, and I teach public relations, I try and churn out graduates every year who go into the profession. I'm always telling them local government's a good place to start, by the way. Unfortunately, in a time when the industry is actually doing reasonably well and has ridden out the recession reasonably well, local government and public sector has not, and that's already been alluded to by other contributions. So there's stretched resources, stretched functions, and the question of whether some activities have completely gone has certainly been our experience in talking to comms directors and heads of comms. What do I mean by that? Well, there's things like, well, obviously, and I'm going to mention this because Eric Pickles is one of my favourite politicians, council publications. Certainly that's worked. Prof does have disappeared. Eric, you can sleep soundly. Public consultation, another key area. Many of the people we've talked to have said, look, we used to regularly talk to our residents, talk to our council taxpayers, do a comprehensive survey of what people liked, didn't like, etc., and what they thought were important in terms of our services, but a lot of that's had to go. And that, for me, is very sad, frankly, from a personal perspective. And obviously, I don't need to say this to you, restructuring. We've seen so many councils and the ones we've talked to and others we've got data from where restructuring has been the reaction, change, in other words, and change seems to be a common theme throughout. Interestingly, and this is where I go slightly off the kind of where you are as a group, but I think you'll find it interesting, experience of comms directors and heads of comms cuts in local media as well, with the honourable exception of the BBC, who's seen, according to one head of comms, have one reporter, for everything. That was their comment, not mine. And that has had an impact in terms of, as one person described it, and this is a cliche, I know, but oven-ready PR. In other words, because of the cuts in local media, there is an opportunity, albeit you have to kind of take a step back and think about what this actually means, to be able to get stuff into the local media without too much trouble. There's a dearth of experienced, knowledgeable and active local government correspondents on many local publications and local radio stations and TV as well. Other issues, an increased focus on customer care and interaction with customers or consumers or lots of different words used for describing people, but certainly increased interaction. I'll come back to that in a second. And obviously the big issue, and David alluded to this, is the impact of the digital transformation that's been going on. And one council has been revolutionary in the way they've responded to that, and when our report comes out you'll see what they've been doing. But it's certainly had an impact on staff, on their jobs, on what they're doing, on training, particular issue around training and retraining staff or training staff to deal with this. And as somebody who, I know I look 21 but I'm a lot older, that has been a real challenge for people who are perhaps weren't brought up with social media, weren't brought up with the internet, aren't used to it, and I've had to learn the ropes myself. I know what that means. So social media particularly has emerged as a key area of activity, need for expertise, need for resources. Interestingly, when questioned, only a few of the people we talked to saw it as the new thing. In other words, what do I mean by that? Most of the people we talked to said it's an addition to what we already do. We still need to talk to the local media, we still need to use all the different ways in which we communicate with our residents and stakeholders and consumers and customers and whatever else. But there was only one or two who said, this is actually the new thing, we should forget about everything else and just do this, or just concentrate all our priority and resources on this. Another factor which I think is quite interesting is the influence of elected members. And again, going back to what I was just saying about people's familiarity with social media, again, a different picture depending on how switched on elected members were to this in terms of being willing to sanction resources being put into this area, although obviously some of them needed no persuading if it meant saving money. So the conclusions, and as I say, a quick health warning to repeat, these are preliminary conclusions. So a mixed picture. Cuts, changes, whatever euphemism, word, semantic phrase you want to use, have been pretty universal. So none of the authorities we talked to said, no, it hasn't affected us. But huge variations in terms of what it means for different authorities and the impact that's had. Training very much on the agenda for everyone we talk to. Again, David, the LGA have been doing a lot of work in this area. The CIPR, I know, does a lot of work in this area. It's a key area, I think, to take forward as a result of this report, making sure that comms professionals are prepared and able to deal with the changes they're facing. One of those areas that gets forgotten but is absolutely crucial, employee engagement, internal communications. Again, a very strong theme from all the people we talked to, that had become a priority and resources had to be devoted to that. And again, the use of digital means to communicate with staff was mentioned many times. Another issue, heightened expectations from residents, consumers, customers, etc., sometimes from elected members, but certainly a sense that greater pressure on communications teams and communication professionals to deliver to a greater level whilst being told they had to cut back on their resources. And I wanted to just pick out one thing which came out in a couple of conversations I certainly had around that kind of, I suppose what I've described as devolution versus diktat. I mentioned Eric Pickles and the kind of early days of this period we're looking at, 2010 onwards. We had the local government minister coming down very heavily on local government communications, as we know. But now we're seeing a change in policy, this idea of devolution, and there's a kind of contradiction there, I think, in one respect, but actually I think there's a common theme. It's a difficult path for councils to tread, and one person I talked to made that point very passionately, that at the same time that you want to, and I recognise this as someone who used to work in local government PR, you want to talk about how important your council is and boost its profile and work with people locally to raise the profile of and persuade people of the importance of local government. There's this conflicting pressure to say, hang on a second, we're being cut to shreds here, we're being cut. Our budgets are being mutilated by budget restraint or budget cuts. We've got a difficult story to tell. So there's actually a very interesting conflict there, which I think, again, needs to be resolved. And for those of you like me who are still a bit of a media junkie, I'm sure most of you are, in fact, I'm sure all of you are, I was listening to the PM programme the other week. In fact, I think it was the piece that came out of the chair of the LGA. And the local government correspondent at the BBC, bless him, I nearly shouted at the radio, well I did shout at the radio actually, was saying, you know, well, is this shroud waving, you know, etc. And his finishing line was, well, I suppose as long as the bins are still being collected, we'll probably believe it's shroud waving. And I screamed at the radio, refuse collections are only a small part of local government. You know, please talk about the things that, you know, social care, education, housing, talk about the things that matter. And it brought to mind to me the fact that we still have a job to do in local government to persuade the world that local government is about more than collecting the bins or running a library. And that, unfortunately, has been a theme. So just to finish off, and I'm going to do it in classic PR fashion, I hope, by coming up with a few sound bites. I was warned by Linda earlier I should do this, so I'm glad I've done it. The key messages from what we've found are influence rather than direct delivery. That's very much the way it's shifted in that time period. That partnership rather than direct control, therefore, has become a very important factor. Innovation rather than business as usual. Innovation is absolutely a prerequisite now for anyone working in local government communications. And I'm going to finish, and Wendy will recognise this with a quote from an academic source. You know, Wendy, it's difficult, we're lecturers, we do this for a living, so we have to do this. And I could have picked out a number of academics to highlight this, but I'm going to choose an American SPA Banks who said, if there's no need for change, there's no need for PR. And the reality is, you work in a sector where change is part and parcel of your daily lives, and therefore PR is absolutely essential. What I hope tonight's report will do, and all the work you're doing, is to highlight the need for local government to continue to batter down the doors and say it's important, it matters, and actually people rely on local government every day of the week. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Bridget, Head of Communications and Admin at Notts Fire and Rescue Service. Everyone's stolen me thunder already, really, with much of the stuff you've said. But the first thing I want to say is thank you for leading this project, Wendy. It is a really brilliant project. I'm genuinely so excited by the findings of the report and the advanced copy of it that I've had. I've been struggling not to hit forward on it all afternoon and send it on to people because I think it really will influence. It's interesting that many of you have used the word influence already, and that's what I feel my role now is as a public relations professional. We influence lots of things. Traditionally, we had a specific set of tactics that we knew we could rely on to do that for us, and that's all changed, and that's really exciting. It's also quite frightening. But I think we've got to embrace those two things, and I think I have that within me. I have a healthy sense of adventure and wanting to be brilliant, the best public relations professional I can be, as well as a healthy sense of fear that all this stuff could pass us by. And that drives us towards CPD and research and insight. And already from taking part in the project, I've met a couple of, well, 3 brilliant people who took part in the focus group with me, and we've already shared some brilliant stuff, learnt from each other, and I think developed a bit of a friendship and a bit of a network that will be worthwhile. So even without reading the report, I've already got something out of it, so thank you for that. And let it drive us, let work like this be how we take control of our futures, and let's not become irrelevant. Let's have a healthy fear of budget cuts and the change that is being thrust upon us if we don't do something about it. And let's have a role in that and be influencers. And that's really all I wanted to say. It's been really good to be part of it. And I'm looking forward to what this will help us achieve in terms of developing ourselves as public relations professionals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to all our speakers. Right, so on to the report. So if I can go forward here. So the aim, it was to go out and connect and engage and basically talk to people and listen. That was the most important thing. We wanted to go and listen to what people had to say. And, you know, in terms of the picture of research that's out there at the moment, there are surveys, and this is a bit different because it was actually going out with quite open-ended questions to see really what came back, and it's fascinating what did interest me was, actually if I go forward to here, and Adrian's alluded to this, is the variety. So we spoke to practitioners working in local government, in the NHS, fire and police, and the range of experiences was incredible. So in some ways, when I came to start reading the transcripts and listening, it was like, how do I put and make sense of all this information, where people were coming from very different positions. But what was interesting, there were clear themes, no matter the situation of the organisation. Some were much worse off than others, and even the sector, there were clear themes that came out. The same language was being used. So in a way, you know, you can sort of think of a continuum with some more extreme than the other, but the same themes are coming out time and time again. Thank goodness, or I don't know what I'd have done. So, you know, from that point of view, it was interesting. So influencing was the main theme. That's what's come out across everybody. All the focus groups, people we talked to, talked again and again about influencing. And when we think about organisations that have been really hit, it's not just in digital communication where other members of the organisation are communicating because they basically can't manage it all themselves. Also, communication, the tactical stuff, is being delivered, particularly in local government, by staff, employees right across the organisation, which really strips communications back to that core of influencing. And that was the key theme and point of interest that emerged. So almost, you know, we can think of this new paradigm that it is influencing, moving it right away from writing prescriptive narrative, trying to control. It's all about influencing. You know, and along that there'll be variants, but at the extreme form, that's where it seemed to be positioned. In there, personal resilience, that was another one that kept coming up. And again, listening to the stories, communicators have had to be resilient to go through all the changes. And as we've said and heard tonight, there is more to come. Underpinning that, because you could almost think, well, why are people still doing this job when it is so hard and you've been through all this? But was this passion that kept coming up again and again? People in this sector are really passionate about the job and why they're doing it, and that was another theme. So yes, resilience, but underpinned with passion, and that was really important. Commercial awareness and value. So for many, the teams are stripped right back. There's nowhere else to go now in terms of making those cuts. So actually generating income is becoming more and more important. And there are many practitioners doing a really good job of that. And again, it's about sharing that practice amongst communicators. Evaluation, we know that's important. In this context, it of course is all about, you know, proving the value, and people are saying we need to demonstrate our value to exist. But many admitted that they're just basically operating quite a reactive service, and they're finding it really difficult to actually deliver on evaluation. Training and development, again, budgets have been slashed, so funding seems to be non-existent or very limited, and it's practitioners that are funding themselves for professional membership, for training and development. And again, I think that comes back to the kind of people doing the job. It is that passion and people really investing in themselves and continuing to do so. And it was interesting actually, because when I looked at the CIPR, the State of the Profession, that survey, through all the different sectors, it was the public sector group that were championing most and rating most highly professionalism, CPD, ethics, which really says a lot about the people doing the job. Okay, so I will do a whistle-stop tour of the main themes. So employee engagement. The reason this one is so incredibly important is, with the teams being reduced, the employees are the communicators often for organisations. So the role of actually enabling, working with employees to make sure that they are communicating on behalf of the organisation is a really important one. So employee engagement was huge. Digital transformation, we've heard a lot about already. That came up again and again, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because yes, you know, there's all the benefits and the opportunities now with digital to unearth and discover, you know, get more insight for our work. But then on the other hand, it's that question of how do we actually manage all of this? And a theme that came through was communicators saying we've actually just got to let go of the reins. We can't do customer service, we can't do all of that. It's staff doing this now. And again, you can see that influence is really threading through that. Commercial awareness, I've touched on. So yeah, going beyond delivering communication, actually now looking at bringing investment in, and there's people in this room that are doing a really brilliant job of that. In fact, that photo might be a dead giveaway. Resilience. I've quoted there Amanda Coleman, Chair of the Police Communicators, and I loved it because she says we've not got big money, we've not got loads of people, but what we have got is passion and the agenda. Okay, so conclusions, influencing. We've talked about digital transformation, resilience, commercial awareness, evaluation. And also, the other thing I've not touched on is continuing, and Sarah's done a really brilliant job this year of standing up for the profession so that those organisational leaders are recognising the value of all the work that you're doing. So that's something that came up, and certainly as a group, that's something that we will be championing. So, out of all that, and I've got copies of the report here this evening, and it's a lot more in depth, so please take a copy and have a read in a bit more depth. But in terms of what we will be doing as a group, we're pledging to work with regional groups. So the CIPR, we're obviously the national committee, but there are regional groups all over the UK, and we'll be working with them to deliver training, events in each of these different areas over the year ahead. We'll continue to stand up for the profession, and also work really hard to engage with those organisational leaders, and this project was the beginnings of us starting to do that. So connecting with Solace, with chief execs, organisational leaders, so that's something that we will continue to do. And I see this piece of work in the mix. There's lots of different groups doing brilliant work, undertaking surveys, running events and training, and this piece of work I see as going into that mix, and we'll be looking to work with some of these groups to take that forward. It's about that conversation, isn't it, and getting things, I suppose, discussed and debated to go forward. Okay. Can I say thank you to everybody for coming this evening? I think we might, because of the time situation, I think we'll take questions just on a one-to-one, perhaps over a glass of wine, because we've got the room till about 8 o'clock. So rather than perhaps us stand up here and field questions, come and have a chat to me over a glass of wine. And my committee, everyone's here, so they'll all be keen to talk to him. Perhaps Sarah, David, Adrian and Bridget. Does that sound okay? Thank you. Thanks.